So, Justine, really, it's a great pleasure to be seeing you again and to have you as a guest for our podcast. So, I'll just introduce you briefly. Justine Willits Toms is the co-founder of New Dimensions Radio. You're also the creative producer and also a longtime friend. And I want to get into some detail about what you're doing now and some of the new things of new directions. But first, I wanted to have you just kind of introduce yourself to our audience and say a little bit about the. I ask people about their origin story,
Oh,
how
great.
you came to be doing over these many, many years, the new dimensions programs that I've been interviewed in and been a part of in a small way over the years. So
Oh, I've
give us the
loved,
story.
I've loved our interviews, Jed, that we've done through the years. I think we've done seven
Yeah.
throughout the 50 years that we've been doing this. And so I've loved that. And thank you for this question, the origin story. I love recalling this moment of the origin of new dimensions. And I first of all, I need to say that I was maybe born with a kind of spiritual enthusiasm. and and with that, I grew up Episcopalian. And then when I moved to the South, to Alabama, I became a Southern Baptist. And then I moved to California, and of all things, I became a Jehovah's Witness. So for about 3 years, I was a Jehovah's Witness. And then it was at that time that I met Michael. And when I met him, it was like a soulmate. I mean, we just recognized one another. And, but, I had this spiritual practice that I needed to straighten out before we went forward in our relationship. So I told Michael, I said, okay, I want to come over and I want to talk about spiritual things. And when he said, fine, great, come on over. So I came over. He was living in Sausalito, just north of San Francisco at the time. And I walked in with all my Jehovah's Witness books from their Watchtower Publishing. And we went down into his little library, which was his second bedroom. And honestly, it was floor to ceiling with books from Buddhism to science of mind to the Bhagavad Gita to Vedanta to pleasures of philosophy. I mean, it was all there. And I said, Michael, I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. I want to talk about the Bible, and I want to use my translation of the Bible. And Jed, I remember so vividly his reaching back behind him and pulling off the green New World Translation of the Bible. It was a Jehovah's Witness Bible. I didn't realize that he had a whole shelf of biblical translations, and he included mine. And I remembered at the time, Jed, ooh, maybe he's being more inclusive than I am. I thought it. I didn't say it out loud, but I remember thinking, hmm. And anyway, we grappled with scripture. I don't remember what we actually grappled with, what the specific scripture. I wish I had written that down. But anyway, we grappled, and I'd say, you can see it means this and this because Jehovah's Witnesses, they're more intellectual in their thoughts about the Bible and their translation. And so they use a whole historical content and context and so forth. And I say, well, you can see this means, and blah, 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 blah. I'd say what it means. And every time I said that, he would say, yes, I see that. And you might look at it like this. He never said, no, you're wrong. That's not the right interpretation. He always included my interpretation this is like an Aikido move. If listeners are used to Aikido, where he's standing with me and looking at it through my direction. And he said, and you might look at it like this. And then he would give me his perspective on it. And every time he did that, Jed, my lens of perception just opened and opened and opened. And, I went home well, we spent all night d grappling. And the next morning, I went home, got my clothes, moved in with him, and for 44 years, we were together until his death. And the interesting thing was that 9 months after that conversation, we incorporated the nonprofit educational organization New Dimensions.
Mm,
And it was Barbara Marx Hubbard, the futurist, the late Barbara Marx Hubbard, she talks about something called supra sex. And that is when people come together spiritually. And that's what it was all about. And that was the beginning. That was the mythic beginning of New Dimensions. And ever since, that conversation continues. I mean, 51 years later, it still continues. And, uh, it's we the wisdom that one can find in these interviews, and I'm sure in the all the interviews that you do too, are not actual possessions, but they're a living field of that
absolutely.
that we enter together. And
Yes.
that's what wisdom is about. And that's what I hope these conversations continue to bring.
Well, it's so great. And just to recall, I know for me, I'd known about New Dimensions for quite a long time, and some of the most iconic, teachers and spiritual guides of. I want you to talk a little bit about that in a minute of some of the people that you've had on. But I knew years ago that I someday I want to be part of that. I want to be, I want to sit in that chair and be able to talk to Michael and then you about, what I did. And so I was really pleased when I got an outreach from you or Michael that said you were interested in some of the work that I'd been doing with men's work and men's health. So maybe you could recall some of the really iconic people that you have interviewed over the years and how you came to feel interested in some of the work that I was doing.
Oh, thank you so much. In particular, the men's studies, which is a wonderful subject that you encompass. I can remember one of the interviews we did was with two people at this two guests, and it was Arjuna Arda and John Gray. And they've been and continue to be in a men's circle for decades. And that particular program really was speaking about consciously reinventing masculinity. And that was very informative to me. Also, we did quite a few interviews with the late poet Robert Bly. And he did many books on the masculine
Right.
principles and all, how they really masculinity needs restoring in
Yeah.
some ways. And he was very articulate about that. Another one I can recall is Father Matthew Fox.
Hmm.
And the first time that we interviewed him back in the 70s, I think it's when he wrote his first book, Original Blessing. And instead of original sin, he really invigorated that whole concept that we're not born in sin, but we're
Yeah.
born in blessing. And but through the years, we've done quite a few interviews with him, and I remember one in particular was reawakening the spirituality of men. So
Yeah.
he focused on that in particular. So those are a few. Of course, Michael Meade, the mythologist,
Right.
and the warrior spirit that he talks about. So these are just a few of the
Yeah.
people that I recall in that specific.
Right.
Um,
Those are, a lot of my colleagues, friends, people I've learned from. But even prior to, the men's work, you had been interviewing many others. Could you say some of the,
oh, I'd love
the
to.
the people that were kind of the cornerstones of the early and continuing work that you've done, and some of the interviews that you do that other people would go, really? You've talked to them?
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, what comes to me is, of course, Joseph Campbell and the Dalai Lama and Buckminster Fuller are some. Dr. Andrew Weil, who is really the one who brought in alternative medicine into the whole field of medical care, and Angeles Arian in her fourfold way, where she said, "Hey, we need to show up and pay attention and tell the truth." And what was the fourth one?
Be open to outcome, but not attached to outcome.
Exactly. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
It's
So,
interesting just while you're talking about Angela's area, and was a close friend of Carlin and I. And after Carlin and I had been married for 15 years, we had a remarriage ceremony, and we both of us knew Angeles Arian, and he was doing a workshop with Brooke Medicine Eagle, who was another, iconic figure. And so we attended this gathering, and we did a remarriage ceremony with that Angeles kind of hosted with the community that we were part of. And Angeles, as you know, was a Basque by background and training, and then her spiritual work all over the world, and so we really are part of this ongoing community of people that have how many interviews have you, done over the 50 years? Do you have an idea of how many
well,
you've
I
actually
do have an
created?
idea. There are 8,000 hours of analog tapes that Stanford University special libraries have in their facility and are saving. And I'm so glad that they are able to save them in pristine condition. And so we're all working to restore some of those older programs, and to re-describe them with more detail. So that's one of the projects that we're working on. And one of my most favorite programs, it always comes up for me when I think about programs in the past that we have done. And this is one with Dr. Charlotte Gordon. And she wrote a book called The Woman Who Named God.
Mm.
And it's all about the relationship of Abraham's two wives, Sarah and Hagar. And Sarah, of course, is the mother of Isaac, which is the whole kind of Christian lineage and even Judaism lineage. And Hagar was the mother of Ishmael, who is the mother of Islam. And I learned so much about Islam and about how these two women were not fighting with each other, that they really were friends, and that when Abraham died in the Old Testament, both Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael came to his funeral. They were living in nearby one another in different tribes, they weren't fighting. And I think that this really continues to inform us with what's going on in the Middle East now and to knowing some of this ancient history. And that's why I feel like that interview was so important to me because it gave me a new vision, a new perspective on Islam and its origins. So that was one that I just
Mm,
loved and loved. Another person that comes to mind that I just have so much respect for is Terry Tempest Williams. And she's a philosopher. She lives in Utah. She and her husband, Brooke Williams, um, they're both Mormon, not probably practicing Mormon, but they're not out of the fold. They haven't been kicked out of the fold, I don't believe. But they both really bring such wisdom and about the environment or about politics or I know Terry's written about the national parks. She's written about art and the importance of art in our consciousness. And anyway, she's anything you want to read of Terry Tempest Williams, I highly encourage it. She's just wonderful, wonderful writer and philosopher. Recently, wait, I want to mention another one. Um, William McDonough, and he is in the line of Buckminster Fuller of an anticipatory design architect. And he wrote a book with his partner. I can't remember his first name. Brumgard is his last name, and he's a chemist. And they wrote Cradle to Cradle, how we must relearn how to remake to make things so that they're completely recyclable. And
mm,
you divide things into biological and technological. So if you cannot invent something that can be taken apart in that way, then don't make it. It's like
mm,
but mostly, and I want to tell you this one, mostly I remember sitting with Bill McDonough and Michael and I were sitting on his front porch in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he said, and it was a beautiful spring day, and the squirrels were running around the yard. It had just rained, and everything was so vibrant, and flowers were blooming, and his little dog was running across the lawn. And he said, I mentioned something about Bucky Fuller used to say, form follows function. And Bill said, he just kind of paused for a second. He said, yes. And function follows celebration. And he said, nature is all about celebration. And those who celebrate the most, and this is a direct quote, those who celebrate the most are the true evolutionary winners.
mm.
And I
Wow.
just,
I love
oh,
that.
wow, yes. And it just reminds me of these days when we're so inundated with all the things that make us want to despair and just spiral down into depression, that to remember to celebrate. We're here to celebrate life.
Mm.
So those
That's
are,
wonderful. That's
yeah.
wonderful memories. And another person I recall that's played a big part in my life. And I want to say, first of all, obviously we're talking to you, but Michael, your husband, who had done, I think the first interview I had done with him, and then I did later interviews with you over the years. But one of the things about both of you is the kind of interviews that you do, are like no others that I've been interviewed hundreds, thousands of times now and over the years. But uh, I remember Michael in particular when I first met him. It was like sitting down with, as you described, a philosopher who's not here to change anybody. He's just here to draw out the best of what we can discuss together. And I'd heard later, you people who read my book and then do interviews, I'd heard that he never, scripted the interviews. He never, it would just be the genuine dialogue that emerged as two people sat down. And what I realized, it made the interviews that you all did so unique. I mean, they were radio, so you didn't have the advantage of, video, but they were so rich and lovely. And one of the people that I know and and I didn't know this until I saw it on one of your list of interviews that had been done, where George Leonard, who was one of the iconic figures in the human potential movement and bringing that to the fore. He also is Aikido. You mentioned Aikido. Carlin and I, that's where we met. Carlin and I, my wife, at the Aikido dojo in Mill Valley, where George Leonard and others were practicing, and we practiced Aikido for a long time. And what I read in one of the interviews was George sat down and interviewed Michael way back, and and turned, in a sense, turned the microphone around and drawed him out about his world. So maybe you'd say a little bit about both of those things, the unique way in which all these interviews, whether it was with the Dalai Lama, with Buckminster Fuller, with people like me, with Sam Keen, George Leonard, all of these people, the kind of value that there is in these interviews. But talk a little bit about George and Michael and that interchange that they did in that interview.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for reminding me of that one. And George, I want to say about George, I remember when he came, at that time we had a studio that we were using in Sausalito. And it was, he came and yes, did interview Michael. But also, and I don't think he said this on the interview, but he said it to us privately. He said, I want to apologize to you for the advice that I gave you when you started New Dimensions. And what he did when we first started, after that conversation in his little
Mm-hmm.
bedroom and stuff, we went around and talked to different people
Mm.
about this idea we had
Yeah.
for New Dimensions. And George Leonard was one of them. And when we went to George, he gave us all sorts of advice about the boulders in the road and what to avoid and how it was going to be challenging and what we were trying to do. And we took that advice into ourselves and just really felt like he was giving us such a great roadmap of what to expect and what to avoid and how to proceed. And so he was apologizing to us years later for what he said to us. And we just had to assure him how much it contributed to our actually being able to do what we were doing. And
Mm.
he actually made a huge contribution for that. So
Mm.
in turning the microphones, and I want to say too, Michael was a master. I honestly, I mean, he died in 2013. I miss him to this day, and I feel he still is part of the whole process for me. And, but we both approach interviews without a script where people will say, well, what are you going to ask me? And, I guess I can give a general idea, but I never know until the
Right.
interview begins
Right.
where it's going to go. I will for myself and for Michael too. I think I could speak for him. We know the possibility of the wisdom that our guest has to share. We
Right.
we know their background and what they are trying to impart to the rest of us. But as far as writing out scripted questions, it's all about, I think if I would say my deepest spiritual practice is to try and be present in an interview. And I make a prayer before the interview that all my guides and all the people that surround me, all my ancestors, including Michael, are with me to help me to stay present so the best possible outcome for this interview will happen. And that means I have to follow the threads that are put out, follow the lights, follow the yellow brick road of
Yeah,
what is being said. And we may not cover everything that I might want to cover, but I feel the most essential things are covered because of that.
yeah. Well, it shows in, the experience I've had and, hundreds, thousands of others that both have been interviewed and the millions of people that have, listened to them over the years. And so I wanted to just, you mentioned it, but I wanted to, bring it up at this point that you have a GoFundMe campaign to restore a lot of these recordings so that they can be utilized now and kept and be made available, in the future. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the campaign and what the goals are and what you're hoping to restore so that these wonderful, wonderful sharings of wisdom at a time when I think the world needs all the wisdom we can get can
Yeah.
be made available.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for asking about this. As as we want the legacy of New Dimensions. Some people have called it the audio the uh, Alexandria audio library of the 21st century in some ways. And so many of these interviews are people on whose shoulders we're standing. For example, I know that we just restored. I can think of two programs we just restored, which one was with Charles Reich, and he wrote a book called Greening of America. I think that if I can remember his bio, he served for as an assistant to a Supreme Court justice, and he was very involved in politics. And so this is a program that was done in the late 80s, I believe. And he talks about democracy. And honestly, what he says could be a reference today in what's happening today in politics. It's so relevant.
Mm,
So the timelessness, or another one that I can think of the timelessness of these interviews are just so important to us right now. Another one I can think of was Susan Griffin, and she wrote about war and what are the increments of war and how do we train warriors? How do we train these young men?
mm,
What does their training involve? And what does it erase from their consciousness and from their ability to be empathetic or to be a warrior and sort of distance from human life in some ways. And so that one again was just so relevant for right now, as warfare is about young men with their computers and they're bombing people at a
yeah.
distance, and it's crazy making. So just to say that about the restoration project and part of it, besides really digitizing it and cleaning up the audio and doing
Yeah,
all of that.
because I think many people, just think, well, when, you've got things recorded, they're going to last forever and, you make them available. And I know that isn't true. You know, the technologies change and things that were wonderful in the past. Say a little bit more detail about what it is that you do and why it's important and what gets lost if this doesn't happen.
Well, I think that what's important besides the recording itself to make that available because it's changing it from analog to digital so that it's just amazing. I mean, can be streamed to any and lots of different places. And we have an affiliation with different platforms such as in audio, Spotify, Apple, Google, all of them.
Okay.
And then but the most important thing for me is to re describe the programs
Mm,
because the older descriptions we have are sometimes very sparse. They don't
mm,
have updated bios of the
mm-hmm.
guest or the contact, maybe their website. Even if a guest has passed on, there might be somebody still
Right,
keeping up with a
right.
website. So to have that information there, to have detail, here were the topics that were discussed, and here's a full description and so forth. So that's very time consuming to actually
Mm,
re-describe it. But Jed, if we don't have all of this information, the legacy is not easily you can't search for it.
right,
We want to make it easy to search for
right.
so that people who are looking for something and they might run across like a Charles Reich or whomever, that they can find it and find our interview with it. And what a special thing to actually hear someone's voice.
Yes.
And I know that AI is now, and I just got an email from a former guest who is doing conversations with people who have passed on. And so
Yeah.
they're actually doing interviews with people
Right.
who were
Their
not recorded.
digitized voice from another
Yeah.
AI world.
And I'm not sure where I'm at with that one. It might be a really good thing. But what we have is authentic. It's
Exactly. And
they're
I
good.
want to I want that first, and I'd like to hear and have people available to hear our interviews, which were wonderful, as well as, all the ones of Dalai Lama and everybody you've mentioned. So tell us, and I will write about this as well, but share a little bit about if people would like to learn more about how they can donate to help this very, very
Oh,
vital
thank you.
restoration process continued. Where do they go? How do they find out
Thank
about
you.
it, and how can they contribute?
Just go to our website, newdimensions.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit organization. So it's newdimensions.org. And it'll be right there where donate, and then that whole GoFundMe will be there, and they can just go for it. And this is so important for we're trying to really arrange for the legacy of New Dimensions and all of these interviews to be available into perpetuity. So that,
That's
I mean, I'm getting long in the tooth. I'm 83 years old now, and hey, I can't keep doing this
Well, I'm
forever. And
83 too, so
yeah, there we
that's part
are.
of why we got the gray hair to
Yeah.
pass on, and we want to, we want to share not only legacy for our, future generations, but for everybody that really needs to have wisdom that is going to keep our planet alive, keep our, future of our well-being. You've touched on a lot of areas that absolutely we want to share with the world. So I hope we can stay in touch and we can
I
continue
can,
to stay
may
connected.
exactly. May I just say
Yeah,
one other thing before
absolutely.
we end this
Say a few
conversation?
whatever.
Yeah. Um,
Go ahead.
it's about many of us can get with the inundation of all the news that we get bombarded by in some ways, and we think, oh, everything is going to hell in a handbasket and it's not going to ever improve. And I have some advice. And what I want to say is we must not be passive spectators to what is going on. We must get off the bleachers and get down into the field of play and make our contribution, however big or small. And don't worry if you think, oh, well, my little bit isn't going to matter. It does matter. And I'm thinking, and isn't it true? Weren't you part of the chorus that we sang in
Yeah.
in Willits?
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you sang tenor
Emmendall.
right there with
Yep.
me. Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the songs in my current singing group called Joyful Noise, we would sing a song, I Just Can't Give Up Now. I don't know if you've ever heard that song.
I
I just
haven't.
can't,
I'm sure I'd like it.
it's I just can't give up now. Let's see what nobody told me the road would be easy, but I don't believe God brought me this far to leave me. So I just can't give up now. I've come too far from where I started from. And that song to me just really encompasses let's not give up now. We've come too far to 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 quit
Yeah.
and know we have help to go forward. And so that's my message to
Yeah.
people that make your contribution, get on the playing field and make it happen with kindness, with empathy, with caring, and we'll all create a better world together.
Indeed. Well, this is inspirational as always, and I want to join it as I did and share my own contribution and just encourage everybody who's watching and listening and reading about what you're doing to, join the party. The other part of it is a lot of fun. I mean, the truth is, this work that we're doing, and I think that you could see it in our energy and the energy of, the people who you've interviewed and shared over. It's just a great party. It's great fun to be together, and there's a lot of good energy going on in the world, and we're a part of it, and hope you'll come and join us. And in the meantime, you and I will obviously stay connected, keep singing, and keep joining.
May it be so. Absolutely. Thank you for this marvelous opportunity, Jed. I loved being with you. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll do more again in the future, I'm sure.
Thank you. We will, for
Yeah.
sure.